Hello everyone, welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. Today I'm really looking forward to chatting to Dave Cohen. Now he's someone I've been following around for a while now. I've always had this dream of writing a sitcom, and he is a coach about teaching people how to write sitcoms. And he's also got a podcast all called Sitcom Geeks, which I've been listening to for a few years. So I was really happy to talk to him today. But today what we were talking about is how to add funny elements to your books. Now Dave's just got a new book all about writing funny elements into your book and how you can bring comedic characters, comedic plot lines, and all those sort of things to your books. So it was quite a funny episode, and it was great to chat to Dave all about bringing funny elements to your book. And I think you're going to really enjoy it and get a bit of a laugh out of it as well. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. I'm really happy to be here with Dave Cohen, who's actually one of my favourite podcasters, and so it's really great to have a chance to speak to him. He's a writer and a comedian. He's had sitcoms on the BBC, and he's a writer of a number of books all about being funny and writing. So Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm absolutely honoured to have you on the show. Your podcast has been one of my favourite things I've listened to about writing a script, and one day I'll get there, I think.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. Well, it's very niche. It's about writing sitcom scripts, or it was, but well, unfortunately, we had to stop doing it really because the show was called Sitcom Geeks, and neither of us were getting any sitcoms on TV, and we thought, this is are we the right people to be doing this now? So, but it's there's still lots of people want to write sitcom, and good luck with it.
Yeah, great. But I mean, you've had quite a big or a long career in comedy writing. So what was it that drew you to comedy in the first place, and how did you get started as a writer?
Well, I kind of knew I always wanted to do writing in some sort of way. And then I suppose, growing up in the 60s, there was just so much comedy and so much music. So I wanted to be a rock star, of course, as everybody does. And then I watched Steptoe and Son when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and just found that very hilarious. And then just watched loads and loads of comedy, and then found a particular type of comedy that answered all my questions. Really, was a band called the Bonzo Dog Band, and in particular, writer Neil Innes, who wrote for a kids' TV show called Do Not Adjust Your Set, and that was
right.
So that was the pre-Monty Python show for Michael Palin and Terry Jones and a few others, but Neil Innes did the comedy songs on it, and so I guess that was probably, and that's been kind of the thing that I'm most known for, really, is the comedy songs. But then pretty much really, it was, I got into radio, and then The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy really which was a radio show before it was a novel. And that, I think probably if I'd known it as a novel first, maybe I would have wanted to be a novelist more when I was 18. But instead, that show just made me think I want to write radio comedy. So that was kind of how I found my way into that world, really, of writing for comedy for radio and TV.
And what's some of the shows that you've worked on?
I did. I was a stand-up comedian for about 10 years, but in the process of while I was there, I started on a show called Weekending, which was a weekly topical show, and it's where all the sort of top comedy writers for now, they all started there. And then I wrote for all sorts of things on the radio, shows called The News Quiz and The Sunday Format and Dead Ringers. And for TV, I wrote for shows like sort of Spitting Image and Have I Got News for You? And then later I was working on more kind of sitcoms, BBC sitcoms like My Family and Not Going Out. But mostly as well, I guess I'd say I'm known for is the songs that I wrote for a kids' TV show called Horrible Histories. And I wrote nearly 100 songs for that.
Amazing. Yeah, that's one of my other favourite podcasts, the You're Dead to Me. That's really funny.
Yeah, Greg is just an amazing guy, really. In fact, he features in this book that I'm bringing out now. But he started out as a researcher on Horrible Histories, and it kind of I sort of owe it to him, I think, in many ways, of that my kind of finding my absolute perfect niche, which is comedy songs about history. And I'd been vaguely interested in history, and I'd done it at school a fair way, but Greg kind of reignited my interest in it. I mean, he started with the Terry Deering Horrible Histories books
Yeah.
as his research, but then it just became just I was so fascinated by the way he wrote about history, which was so different from how I'd grown up learning it, which was all, like a kind of giant catalogue of numbers and dates and kings and queens, which of course was very important back in the days when kings and queens were also basically in charge of the country. But he also just brought the eras to life, really, and that's been a really great thing for me in the sort of later years of my writing.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. I mean, your first book, or well, I'm not sure his first book, sorry, but the book that I read first of yours was The Complete Comedy Writer, and I really, really enjoyed that book. And so, what gave you the idea to write that book first?
With all the non-fiction books that I write, they're basically that they are the books where I need to find answers, and I can't find answers anywhere else. And so
Yeah.
it, that book was basically me working out. Been a pretty successful writer for on topical comedy, and I wanted to do more sitcom, and I was just getting a bit of success as a sitcom writer, sort of a bit later in my career, but I felt everything that I knew was from watching shows, but I also felt there's something clearer here. There must be method here. It's not just my instinct. And so I wanted to learn how to write sitcom. And once I decided that, that meant I needed to learn about story and character, which is what everything is about, really.
Yeah.
And so that took me to Aristotle and defining stories. And I read a very short book called The Poetics by Aristotle, and you kind of that tells you almost everything you need to know. So basically, I'm just building on a book that was written 2,500 years ago.
Yeah. Inside that book, you talk about a lot of like different techniques that you can use in storytelling. What are the main ones you think that people should be thinking about when they're writing? Is there any like particular places where they should be starting?
Yeah, I think you start with the basics, which is that first of all, you have an idea, um,
Yeah.
and that in itself is, there's kind of more to that than people often realize, because everybody has ideas, and lots of people have lots of great ideas. But you kind of, even before you write anything at all, you want to kind of test it, and you want to sort of run with it. And you need to let go of it if it's not quite there yet, and not throw it away, because you might end up using it. You might find the answer to the question that you couldn't find 5 years earlier. You go, oh yes, that's what it was. But if you can't, if you're forcing it at this early stage, then that's a bit of a kind of red flag, really, I would say. But then once you really feel, oh yeah, this is a good idea, there are four basics, and they're just very straightforwardly. It's like it's a character, and this goes back to Aristotle. You've got a main character, or possibly in comedy, you've got two characters. Like a mismatched couple, like Peep
Yeah.
Show, say. So you've got the character, and then they've got something that they want, a goal, a very specific thing, and then there are obstacles in the way, and then you want to know what the world is. So those are the kind of four basics, and you just need to kind of think. Again, you're still not writing anything at all, but that's where you sort of start to think about it,
Yeah.
and the world bit tells you how this is going to make it different from everything else that's been before, because everything has a character going on a journey, and they have goals, and there are obstacles along the way. That's just every single story ever. But
Yeah.
you know
Do those concepts you're talking about, they're in sitcoms, obviously, as you mentioned, Peep Show and Fawlty Towers. They have those the mismatched characters in the world and the obstacles in the way. Is it exactly the same thing in when you come to writing your funny novels as well?
Yes, I'd say it is, really. I think it's the same. It's the same in almost all narratives. I mean, there are big differences writing novels compared to, say, writing a sitcom script, but there are also a lot of similarities. but I mean, principally, it's the same concept. I think the difference, which as a regular listener to Sitcom Geeks, you will have heard me and James say many times, is that sitcom differs from everything else in that the characters, they may go on a journey, but they don't come through the journey with any knowledge
Yeah.
or self-awareness. They are still the same character, and they've learned nothing, or they've learned something at the end of the episode, but or they've learned something during the episode, but by the end of the episode they've forgotten it, which again is like a bit like real life, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that thing again. I promised, Teddy. I said I wouldn't do it. Okay. 5 minutes
Yeah.
cut to 5 minutes later. Oh, I just did that thing again.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah. I'm going to die. Next thing you know, you're eating biscuits yet again. So your newest book, which we'll talk about in a sec, is about being funny in novels. But before that, you actually wrote some comedy novels, the Barry Goldman series. So what was the inspiration behind writing those books?
I guess part of it was when Rick Mail died, and I'd known Rick when we were students, and we met at the Edinburgh Fringe, and it was a kind of really important moment in my life, seeing the show that he did with Aid Edmondson in 1979, which was called Death on the Toilet, and, which was a reference to, like, a couple of years earlier, Elvis Presley had died in that situation. So it was already kind of, for 1979, that was already quite a kind of shocking title, really. And I got to know Rick through mutual friends who were studying drama with him and Aid in Manchester. And I went to see this show, and it just was not like anything that I'd ever seen before, really. And it was, it was theatre, and it was funny, but it was funny in a way that I totally recognised from my own the stuff I'd watched and growing up. It was sort of like steptoe sitcom funny, but it was also, so it was live, and they were in the room, and they were just extraordinary performers. And I realised sort of decades later that it was actually the template for Bottom.
Right.
That was kind of what it was. But in 1979, it was just the most astonishing thing. And I spent 10 years as a stand-up comedian, and I always felt the story of the beginnings of alternative comedy haven't really been told in a very, but haven't been told well yet. And I thought this character, Barry Goldman, who's basically me, was should be the one to tell it. So the first book is set in the 70s, the first time I went to Edinburgh, and then the second book is when I started out as a professional comedian, and I'm just writing the third one now, which is the final one.
Right.
It'll take us to about 1987, and I will say nothing more.
But so when you were writing those novels, was that the first time you'd written a novel?
Yes, I was like everyone else, I'm sure, who listens to your podcast. I'd had many, many, many chapter ones.
Right. Okay.
I had years and years of wanting to be a novelist, and I think partly because I was writing TV and radio comedy or jokes, stand-up jokes, and like, a joke is, I don't know, 10 words, 15 words, lasts a few seconds, and I can get my head around that. And then I taught myself to write sitcom scripts. Sitcom scripts, they're about 4,000 or 5,000 words, and again, it's a step up from just a gag, and it's about character and story as well. But then the next step from there, from writing 5,000 word sitcom to like an 80,000 word novel, it was just, I just didn't have the knowledge. And in a sense, that's kind of when I started to write the Barry Goldman books. I thought, well, this is just familiar material for me, so I can use, and again, a lot of writers, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will have done the same thing. They'll have said, this is what happened in my life, I'm going to turn it into a story. And I think I'd always tried that before, but the big difference came when I gave myself permission to lie.
Right.
and that was
Okay.
with Barry. There's a lot of autobiographical stuff in there, and the more drafts I went through, the more I said, actually, maybe I'll take that bit out because although it happened, it's not really adding anything to a story. I'll just make up something here. And by the time I got to the second book, it was much more a kind of like a sort of impressionist painting, whereas say the first draft of the first Barry Goldman was a photograph, a clear photograph of me, and then
Yeah.
so I'm just moving into fiction. That's the key word, really, isn't it? Fiction.
Yeah, exactly. And but when you're writing out the story, did you? What was your technique for like plotting it out? Because obviously you needed to weave humor into it, and that was the whole point of the book. Really, was to get funny parts into it. But as you mentioned with a book, you've got to get that narrative and the story right. So did you plot that out first, or and then with the funny bits afterwards, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never heard when I was all the time that I was working as a writer for TV and radio. Um, you were kind of planning things because a sitcom is whatever 24 minutes long. Things have to happen at exact points, so you're always doing structure. Um, and then I'd heard this thing when in the world of self-publishing, I came across this thing. Are you a plotter or a pantser? I thought,
Yeah,
what?
people talk about it all the time on this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, pantser. Oh, you just sit there with a blank sheet of paper. Chapter one, this is going to happen. All right. And I couldn't. It's not that I, my for me, structure is so liberating, because you only have 3 minutes in the opening of your sitcom to get to the first point of this is this week's story. So
Yeah.
you've got to get there in a very short space of time. So you have to really kind of plan it. But if the opening 3 minutes of an episode of say Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you compare it to the opening 3 minutes of an episode of Miranda, you know,
Yeah.
they're just completely different. But 3 minutes in, bang, thing happens. This is setting off the story. So structure, rather than being a straitjacket, I look at structure as a liberation. Having said that, I've come to understand now when when I first when I did the first novel, and people say you should never publish your first novel, and they're right because you learn how to write a novel when you write your first novel, and then the
Yeah.
second one is like, oh right, yeah, this is it, and so you find I was able to be much more kind of free form. I felt with the second book, even though I had a pretty solid structure. I knew kind of where things were happening mostly, but then I did actually there was a little bit more of the pantser. I've got this new thing as well, which is I think there's also you should have somebody who I call the passenger. So,
Okay.
so the plotter is working hard at the structure and
These
make
are characters in the book, you mean? Sorry.
yeah in
Yeah.
well when you're writing, yeah,
Yeah.
do structure, do at least have an idea of where big things are going to happen that keep
Yeah.
your reader interested. Pantser is, within that you can, muck around a bit. But then I've got the
Yeah.
passenger who just, if when you're struggling a bit with where is it going and what's happening with the character, is you just kind of sit back and watch the character, and you kind of put that character in situations that aren't necessarily going to be in the book, but they're going to make that character do things and take it to places that you hadn't thought of before, because you just too much focused on your story and your structure,
Yeah.
or just free writing. But actually nailing that character, but just sort of sitting back and seeing them mess up, this being comedy, um
Yeah.
it gives you an extra layer, I think, over and above just saying, oh, I'm making it all up on the fly, or no, I'm intricately building these foundations here.
Right. So, do you have an example of when you've used like that idea of the passenger? Like, what sort of scenarios you've used to have that passenger in?
I think I used it. I used it with this with Barry Goldman, and with the
Yeah.
in the second Barry Goldman book. And again, this was me having to kind of break away from Dave. It's not about you, it's about this fictional character. And I had him doing what I was doing a lot of over the years, which was, getting in cars with other comedians and driving up to Manchester or Liverpool or whatever and doing gigs. But then I had him kind of being different to me. I said, well, okay, you've just done this gig, and you've got a girlfriend at home, and there's somebody hitting on you here. What are you going to do, Barry? Rather than knowing what Dave would do in that situation. I thought, well, here are a number of possibilities of what Barry can do, and it gave
Yeah.
me just a nice. I just mostly it was all freeform, and it didn't really, nothing came of it. But there was just one little nice moment that where he had the point where he could admit, and nothing did happen, but he could have told his girlfriend about what happened, but he chose not to, and it
Yeah.
sort of felt to me like it was a really useful turning point right at the end of the book.
Yeah. Brilliant. When with your writing style, I know you're talking about just now with the sitcoms, you've got particular beats you need to hit, or there's like structure. Did you have any like stylistic beats you wanted to hit with your novel writing,
Yeah,
or any like points in the story? I know there's a book called Save the Cat, which is about like novel writing. I know
exactly.
people
Yeah.
write, and a lot of people. Was that sort of the structure you kind of followed?
Well, I was just going to mention Save the Cat because,
Okay, sorry.
yeah, just to the pertinent to the question, and yeah, I mean the original Save the Cat is a screenwriter, is a movie book, and then it was hugely successful, so he sort of sold off the franchise. So there's Save the Cat does novels, Save the Cat does
Yeah.
sitcom, or whatever, and and this is the proof of how everything does go back to Aristotle, is that pretty much the 15 beats of Save the Cat follow are similar to it just depends on the size of the thing, but yeah, the Save the Cat is a pretty good starting point, I would say, for
Yeah.
whether it's screenplay, sitcom, or novel.
Yeah. And in your book, your most recent book you've just written, which is coming out soon, which is Funny Up Your Fiction, Add Light and Shade and Laughs to Your Novel. So this book is all about basically making your novels funny. And one of your quotes, which I really liked, was, "There's no fiction genre that can't be helped, by adding a touch of comedy." What what do you mean by that?
Well, again, this comes back to why did I write this book? Well, because there isn't anything out there about how to add funny stuff to your novel, and
Yeah.
and I needed to find out, having written,
Yeah.
and I started to think about this book before I wrote the second Barry book. So they kind of each of those sort of helped me really, and helped me to look for the answers. And what one of the huge mistakes one makes when writing comedy, unfortunately, and I've made it, is you think, I want to write, I just want to write a funny book, and which is how I felt about it, and I ignored all the advice of, well, if you're self-publishing, you need to be in a genre. I just thought, no, it's a funny book, and people know me from Horrible Histories, and blah blah blah. Cut to, as with everybody after their first novel, the tumbleweeds, and daily checking of the Amazon marketing figures turns into weekly checking of the Amazon marketing figure. Oh, I sold a book last month.
Yeah.
That whole novelist thing. So the mistake, and once I finished the Barry trilogy,
Yeah.
the next book I write, I'm fairly sure will be in a genre. So sorry, that was a bit of a preamble to answer the question, but it comes back to coming back to those four things that I mentioned right at the start. They kind of correspond in some ways to some other kind of genre. So you've got a character, goals, obstacles, and world.
Yeah.
Let's take world for example. I mean, the science fiction and fantasy are very much, the world is the most important thing. in those things. So, I mean, I don't know enough about science fiction because it's not a genre that I read a huge amount of. If I came up with an idea, a science fiction, oh, this is an interesting idea. Maybe it's the sort of 300 years in the future, and we've all, AI has taken over, and our bodies are all AI, whatever. And there's probably a million people have had that idea, but
The book's
you know,
probably written with AI as well.
yeah. Uh, but what's worked is the person who said, "Oh, actually, this is the world that I'm creating." And you look at someone like you look at Terry Pratchett's books, and
Yes, brilliant.
Discworld is a very, very clear creation. And interestingly, what Terry Pratchett always used to say about when you're creating a world in science fiction, he said the first question you always ask is, if I'm allowed to use rude words on
Yeah,
this on
you
this
can swear. Yeah,
podcast.
you can curse, as the Americans say.
Okay, it's like, how does the shit go in and how does it go out? He based Discworld pretty much on, obviously not a giant turtle with on the back of four elephants or whatever it is. But the river that runs through it is based on the River Thames 19th century, which again, going back to, thanks to Greg, I knew that if you lived in London in the mid 19th century, there was basically an open sewer running all the way through your city, and that sewer was the River Thames, and it was just absolutely disgusting and filthy, and people died of cholera and all those things, diphtheria, whatever. So, so that's the kind of, and you can see how, as more than just the kind of, oh, isn't that funny? It's on the back of four elephants, which is just his weirdness, but there's also it's a funny idea of like, well, if you know that in this world that you're building that actually the sewage system is just disgusting, that's gonna give you somewhere funny to go with it, something like, say, crime fiction, and there's a lot of funny murder mysteries. I mean, how did
Yeah.
how did that happen? Murders don't happen that often, and also when they do, they're never funny. How do they
Yes.
manage to do that? And so you'll see in, say, the books of someone like Richard Osman, who is the current master of the form. He will have, and lots of murder mysteries and things, that they have a mismatched couple. So it'll be like a character thing, and it is almost a sort of cliche of the American cop shows. There's two
Yeah.
characters who, well, there's this one plays by the rules, and this one's a maverick. And you can make that serious drama, but you can also make that extremely funny. And actually going all the way back to Holmes and Watson, that even before Stephen Moffat, who's an excellent TV comedy writer, or I mean, TV writer or run, who happens to be very good at comedy as well. But he really played the Cumberbatch and Freeman,
Yes.
Holmes and Watson, just very much for laughs. But even the original Conan Doyle Holmes is he is extremely clever, but he's also very pompous. And Watson
Yes.
is quite dull, but he is very good at sort of pricking Holmes's pomposity. So
Yeah.
that's how you kind of bring, so that it just becomes more than this. Oh, the mystery of the Hound of the Baskervilles. What is what
Yeah.
a curious mystery. Well, it is a curious mystery, but we don't. It's not just a book that's read by people who like mysteries. It's read by people who like general books in general, and they like to have a laugh as well when they're
Yeah.
reading a book. So yeah.
That's a really good point, because obviously a lot of people I speak to, they're thinking about making a book funnier, but then one of the issues they come up with is they're not very good at writing jokes. But what you're saying is it's actually not necessarily like jokes you have to put in to make it funny. It's actually the characters and the way they interact with each other that will bring out the humor, like in each other.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are afraid of writing comedy because they'll say, I can't write jokes. And I mean, yes, there is a very specific skill to being a gag writer. And the difference between writing a 10-word gag, I mean, if I was to just write a book that's just gag, 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 by about page 3, you would just go, okay, this is funny, but what's going to happen now? Oh, I've
Yeah,
just got to keep telling jokes, and basically you put that book down very quickly. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I think people have a fear of comedy, and in some ways, there is a there's a reason for that, which is that you know what it's like when you say something that you think's funny, and it's met by indifference or
yeah,
hostility. You know how horrible that feeling is,
yeah,
and certainly also I do notice because I teach a lot of comedy writing, and I get a lot of women sending emails saying I'd like to write comedy, but I'm not sure if I'm funny or not. And whereas blokes basically say I want to write comedy and it's going to be a comedy about this and this, they haven't really thought about, they have less shame, I think, or less of
right.
that fear. And actually that's not a bad thing to be. And I would say to women is just look at how men do comedy, and just dive in. And if it's still horrible and humiliating and terrible, then you know dip out. But actually, when you're writing a novel, as we've been talking about, really everything is kind of, lots and lots of things are pretty much the same. And where you're adding comedy, really, you're just kind of, I think the big thing to say is it's about a character's self-awareness. And it's, if your main character, whatever they're doing, whatever their journey is, they lack self-awareness in a crucial area, and you can just exploit that, however you want to do it, whether it's like, and I mean, just take your hero in the action adventure and or science fiction thing, and they're desperate to do something and they have to get it done, and now put them on a phone to someone, thank you for calling, and to get through the dungeon to fight the blah blah, press 3 on your phone thing, and you
Yeah,
press 3, and it, to get through the dungeon, press 3. I just bloody press 3, so that's a kind of way, and actually that's a kind of good way, I find when I don't read a huge amount of thrillers, but again, it's nice when there's a little break from the relentless pursuit of the bad guy. It helps for your hero or heroine to just show a little bit of humanity and show a little bit of weakness, because then we're rooting for them even more.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's all about building that sort of rich characters, and
Hmm.
those adding that humor element does like brings like a human side to them, I think.
Hmm.
With your when people who maybe they're not that funny themselves, but they're writing books, they want to kind of add that element to it. Have you got any tips for people who want to try and be a bit more funny?
Yeah, well, I think that thing about character is certainly that is the number one issue that you want to be thinking about, is to just give your character that sort of element of lack of self-awareness.
Yeah,
Um, Other things are, and again, this is all very old stuff. If you look at a lot of all the old, some of the greatest comedy books, really, and actually you can get a long way just reading Jane Austen and Charles Dickens, because Austen is just full of characters who lack self-awareness, and Dickens is just full of great stories and funny things that happen along the way. I mean, there's bring in a character, make a character pompous is a good way of, not necessarily your main character. There's a thing that I mentioned in Complete Comedy Writer, which I think helps, would help here as well, which is to use the thesaurus, so that you can look at your main character. For instance, let's say that your main character thinks that they are very, very organized, and so you look up you look up a word like organized in a very big thesaurus, not just the online ones or something, and
yeah,
you'll see all these words, organized, thorough, rigorous, oh, that's good. And then you go a little bit further down, it's self-controlling, rigid, and
right.
they're all, and so you can make how that person doesn't see it. They just think, no, I'm organized, and if you don't do it my way, look, I've got this color coded thing here, you've got to do it my way or it's all going to go terribly wrong. So that's a kind of, that's the sort of thing that, I mean, far be it from me to give Dan Brown any tips on writing. I mean, credit to him. Those Da Vinci books or whatever, whatever you say about them, they rattle through at a great pace,
Oh,
and they have. You just want to keep knowing all the time what's going to happen, what's going to happen.
impossible to put down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it would be nice maybe just occasionally to have a little moment where this guy Langdon or whatever, I can't remember who, he sort of shows a sort of moment of vulnerability, or that he thinks he knows it all, and then somebody else, some idiot, comes along and says, no, it's this. Ah, yeah, you're right. Just look at your main character, and one of the things that I recommend in the book as well is to look at yourself. Um,
Yeah.
and this isn't, I don't mean, I know there's this idea we all have a sort of dark side and we all think evil thoughts and that sort of thing, but which is true. And if you want to go that way, then sure. But I think of it more as like the sort of things that make you cringe about what you did once. Did you really have that conversation with that woman you fancied, and did you really say that thing? And oh God, and if you can remember that feeling that you had when you did that kind of wrong thing or whatever, and just give it to one of your characters, and that will really bring that character to life and also make people laugh because they'll recognize it in themselves.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's I really like those tips, like thinking about yourself, looking at the different characters to try and like bring that world to life. I think that's really good advice. In your latest book, so what's the we talked about some of those different parts about adding some about being funny, but what are the sort of, are there any other key takeaways that you think people should know before they read it?
Yeah, well, I think we've talked about most of the things. I mean, the first thing is that fear of funny. You kind of
Yeah.
do need to overcome your fear. Don't the thing to worry about more, as any first novelist listening to this will tell you, is dealing with indifference. That's the hard thing to deal with. Don't worry that you're going to get cancelled, because you probably won't. I mean, again, this is a very live thing. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to offend people, or I do want to offend people, and therefore I'm worried I'll get cancelled. But you know, even people who offend people and other people say we should cancel them, they've got their people who support them will make sure they're not cancelled. So, that's not a big deal. The other thing, the other main thing, as I say, is to just be aware that so much of comedy, so much of writing is the same across comedy, drama, and tragedy. And that's the main thing with comedy is to be is you're not adding jokes. You're not just saying, "Oh, I need to put jokes in, need to put jokes in." You've got to get everything right. You've got to get the structure right first. I think one other thing that I would just say about character that I haven't mentioned yet is that no comedy character. Comedy doesn't work if a person is playing a character for the laughs. They have to be absolutely serious about what they want, who they think they are, what they want. And so you have this very kind of, they're not just, I mean, yeah, they're slipping on a banana skin, metaphorically, but you don't have to have them doing that, but you do. They are, that is a classic example of, when you're walking down the street, oh, well, I've slipped, and the first thing that you do is you try and save face, and so you don't go, oh, look at me, I've slipped. And you wouldn't do that in your book either. You would just, so your character is deathly serious, about what they want. You mentioned Basil
Yeah.
Fawlty. I mean, Basil Fawlty is whatever else he is. He is convinced that he is God's gift to being a hotelier.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So when is your book coming out?
It should be out end of September
Yeah. And
on
have you?
books, ebooks, and audio, all being well.
Yeah. And have there been any particular marketing strategies that you've tried to use that have not necessarily with this book, with your previous books as well, that you're going to try and use again this time?
I have noticed it gets ever so slightly easier with each book, but that's because I started from such a self-publishing point of view. I started from a sort of standing start. I knew nothing at all. I know enough now to know that actually I the main thing I'm doing is I'm kind of speaking to more people on podcasts and doing more blogs and things. And I think that's I think whoever you are, whatever, if you're what you need to find your way of doing. And there's just a million possible ways that you can do things, and I've probably done about 40 or 50 that have got me nowhere at all, so there's probably no point me mentioning. But I mean, I did do a book launch. I ended up setting up a book festival in my local area last year, which went really well, and that was just fun to do, and that taught me a huge amount about the publishing world and about my minuscule place in it. But it was just fun, and it was a great way to connect with people as well. So I really,
definitely.
I think that was fun to do.
You've also, I mean, your newsletter is great. That's how because I read all your episodes. It's one of my favorite newsletters that comes out.
You're my kind of fan, Teddy. Tell your friends.
I talk about you too much. Yeah, I will tell your friends. Well, thanks so much. It's been really great listening to you. So for people who want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to follow you, get in touch?
Yeah, so go to davecohen.org.uk. Everything's there, and that's where you sign up for the newsletter. And also I've got basically it's just I'm putting up there a very general, very short, rough guide to if you want to become a comedy writer, and all the different options that are available to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. And just the last question, is what's the book that you recommend everyone should be reading that maybe they're not reading at the moment?
Well, the book I recommend really it's a series. I think it's 4 books now, but it's a writer called Christopher Shevlin, who you won't have heard of, and many people won't have heard of, but he's probably one of the best-selling authors in Britain. He's written 4 very funny books, sort of vaguely detective novelty, but I don't think you would call them crime fiction. But the character is called Jonathan Fairfax, and it's Jonathan with Jonathan Fairfax, and I can't remember all the titles, but there are 4 books in the series, and this character is basically this sort of hopeless bloke with no social skills and just no ability to kind of push himself forward. So he is very much a kind of character, classic lovable loser in the sort of British comedy sense of the word, but he sort of ends up solving these mysteries, and the books are really funny and they sell loads, and Christopher's a very sweet, lovely guy. I've met him a few times now, and he is a great example in the self-publishing world. Also, he's not writing to genre, he's just writing funny books, and I think he was my inspiration really for thinking, I can just write a novel and it's all fine. But it's it needs a little bit more than that, I think.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. That sounds right up my street. So that's on my list next. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate you spending time to come and chat to us about your new book. I'm really looking forward to reading it when it comes out.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.